What's going on, everybody? This is Richard Hake, aka the Hawk, with the Prospect Pod. We are back for another week of the Prospect Pod, and we are just continuing our trek all the way through all 30 systems. It has been a time to this point, and it's just going to continue to get better and better, or so we hope. Of course, I've got an awesome guest here today, and I'll introduce him here in just a moment. I do want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast, rate and review. Really does help us get our name out there into the industry. Also want to give a good shout out to some of our new patrons over on the Weekly Streamer Patreon page. Kevin, Trey, and Hunter, welcome to the Weekly Streamer Patreon. We are very, very happy to have you guys there. And for any of you who are wondering what is this Patreon that you guys continually talk about, obviously you guys see a lot of our work here on Facebook. We do have the Weekly Streamer Facebook group page, of which that we put a lot of different content out there for you. But we do also have the Patreon page, which for as low as $5 a month, you can get access to the full write-ups for these podcasts that you're here in the Houston Astros systems, the one that we're doing today. You can see the full write-up, 1 through 10 in write-ups and 11 through 30 in rankings. It's a really awesome value for that, but that's not all you get. Heck no. You get the write-ups for these systems. You get the awesome pitching breakdowns that our very own Matty Ball Game Matthew Baisden does for us here at the Weekly Streamer. You get access to the Discord channel. That is awesome stuff, man. You're able to talk to us, work out different trades. You can work out with a lot of your different peers that are here in the Weekly Streamer. Really awesome perk to being in Patreon. And then the final one on there, there's much more, but what I'm going to talk about here is the rankings. We have, the 500 dynasty rankings, 600 prospect rankings, and first year player draft breakdowns for not only this year in 2021, but also for now, 2022. I've already got that being broken down there. It's your boy, the Hawk. That's where it is on the Weekly Streamer Patreon page. Once again, for $5 a month, you guys can be able to check that out. It does support us and continue to build a lot more content for you. Anyway, so now we're going to get into the episode here. And like I said, I have an awesome guest here with me. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you can see us right here. And my guest is Mr. Matty Ball Game Matthew Baisden is back on the Prospect Pod. Sir, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. How are you doing today?
I can't complain. Talking about baseball. We're going to be jumping into the Houston Astros, or as Dodger Dave Dutton likes to call them, the Houston Asterix. Okay. Yeah, that went over very well. Anyway.
No, I'll be honest with you.
A few moments later.
I'll be honest with you. I forgot we were doing the video part of this, and my only thought is my hair looks terrible.
That's why I wear the hat every time I do these. See? The method of my madness.
Fail.
Oh, exactly. So, Matt, I did the write-up on this, and I'll be passing the torch over to you here in just a moment. I want your opinion, though, on what you think of the state of the Astros minor league system to this point. Obviously, we know what they've been able to accomplish in the majors, but what do you see from the write-up that I ended up doing?
Well, one of the things that you expect with a lot of these teams that become perpetual contenders is that they have to get used to drafting at the bottom of the draft now. And after Houston switched from the NL to the AL when they were purchased, they were bottom dwellers for a number of years, and they were able to stockpile that upper tier talent. They had the largest bonus pools, they had the highest draft picks, and they capitalized on that with a bunch of marquee players in Altuve and Bregman and Correa, and they also got the most out of a lot of the guys that they brought in to turn into World Series contenders. And with that, they shifted to drafting at the bottom of the order, and this system is a representation of that. They've had to really focus on trying to get those diamonds in the rough and develop and polish them. And I think when you look at the breakdown that you've done, that's pretty much the perfect example of exactly that. They're trying to adjust to getting the most out of talent, and when you do that, you have a lot of what would be considered in the industry. A bunch of no-name guys, and that kind of what I see is populating throughout your write-up is there's a lot of no-name guys, and luckily we've got you here, the uh, I guess the prospect prophet that you are, and we're gonna have you shed some light on some of these guys for us, so we can get some kind of insight into what it is we're looking at. Because really, honestly, for a lot of guys who don't get quite as deep as some of the guys with the streamer, um, they may not ever have an opportunity to see or understand what it is that they're looking at. And one thing I did notice before I continue to, go on too long, is there's a lot of guys who are a lot older at the top of this, and guys that you would think would be pushed all the way to the majors by this point. Um, but that's pretty much where I'm at with it right now.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really, really good point. Not only at the fact that they've been drafting a lot at the bottom of these drafts, but recently, with everything that's happened with the Houston Astros or Asterix, they've been having picks taken away from them as a result, right? So, you'll see that in this draft, in this write up that I did. It's amazing because the majority of these draft picks are not taken until the second or third round in a lot of these because they've missed out on so many different picks. I believe in my write up, I want to say like Alex Santos, I think was like the earliest pick since basically Forrest Whitley, I think is what it ended up being. It was something
Wow.
ridiculous here. So I mean, they haven't been able to draft, these top tier guys, which has been very difficult to be able to refill out the team, and make it into a better contender. So, I mean, it was a little bit difficult for me in terms of trying to write up this system. And it's really just for that fact, just for the sole fact that a lot of these guys are older. They're drafting accordingly because they need to keep flooding the majors with them. Um, and the top tier prospect talent that we're accustomed to seeing with them and some that they've traded away isn't as much the case anymore. So I'm going to be really curious going forward how they're going to end up handling that.
Well, to give a little bit of explanation of that to some people who don't know, because they're drafting these more college and polished guys, they don't have an opportunity to keep their contention window open if they get, this is just an example, the Bobby Witt types who are going to take a little bit more time to develop, the Corbin Carrolls, the CJ Abrams, the ones that are drafted that are going to take a few years. They do not help to keep that title contention window open, which is what they're largely focusing on. And that speaks to what you just said, but also it speaks to that the age of that system being so high from a medium standpoint.
Yeah. No, I think you hit that right on the head. Right on the head there. So, we'll go through the 1 through 10 write up that I did here for the Houston Astros. And like we said, you can see the entire write up. We're going to touch on some of it here in the podcast, but definitely recommend being able to read through the article. I did do a lot of deep dives into, statistics, breakdowns on walk rate, strikeout rate, whatever the case might be. I think you guys will find it very interesting. And for those of you that do deeper dynasty leagues, listen up because this is a system that can really help you in those 20 team 10 or 20 and 30 team leagues, um, to be able to build up a system depth. And these are guys that could theoretically get a crack at the major leagues and won't cost the team much. So, we'll go ahead and we'll go and dive into it. I'm going to turn over the reins to Matty Ballgame now as we go ahead and get into the system breakdown.
Well, the first name that pops up is somebody you and I became very familiar with in the summer of this year. It was a guy who I knew nothing about, didn't know he existed at all. And it's a guy, he's 23 years old. He's shortstop named Shay Whitcomb, standing at 6'3", 202 pounds. In 2020, he was drafted in the 5th round. And this year, he spent his entire season split almost evenly between low A in high A. And you and I got the opportunity to see him in high A in Greensboro. And I think I don't think I'm speaking too far out of turn to say you fell in love with him during that game. And so just go ahead and tell us a little bit about Mr. Shay Whitcomb, if you will, please, sir.
Yeah, so this is the first season Shay Wickham's been able to be out there after being drafted in 2020. Now, he was drafted out of San Diego State University and was kind of a under the radar type of prospect, but you'll find in this system this is really what they kind of do. They go for some of the lower schools, look at the underrated talent, and then be able to try to bring them up through the system. Well, Shay Wickham didn't need much time to be able to marinate there in the system. In his first full year, he was able to slash 293, 363, and 530 slug, which is fantastic across two different levels. And, one of the first things that I take a look at whenever I look at a lot of these numbers is how did he do with the transition from one level to the next? And legitimately, his numbers got better whenever they went to high A, but they were really sustainable from what he was doing in low A. It's a very easy transition up into high A. On the year total, he did have 23 home runs, 30 stolen bases across low A and high A. 25 doubles shows that there's still, some power that's here. It's amazing to think, whenever he's hitting 23 home runs in, 99 games. So Shea Whitcomb, to me, whenever we saw him in Greensboro, just seemed like a complete player all the way around. And I think the Astros view him as that way too, because they're playing him at short, they're playing him at second, they're playing him around the infield, really. Try to get the best fit possible. And at 23 years old, the guy is an older prospect to this point. We saw, some awesome hits, line drives, quick out the box, smooth swing through the zone. And not only that, but obviously with the 30 stolen bases, he can show off the wheels on the bases. If you're not paying attention and he takes off, that's fantastic. Obviously, we know about the different rule changes in low A, and a lot of the stolen bases that we have been seeing have been coming from low A. Previously, on the Detroit Tigers podcast, we were talking about Gage Workman, and that's exactly what happened. He stole a lot of his bases in low A. Jay Whitcomb here stole 14 in low A and 16 in high A. The guy can steal bases, no matter what level it is. So that's really encouraging going forward. And I think that this, whenever you see the write up, and obviously might be hearing it right now, you might be shocked based on a lot of the bigger names that are in the minor league system for Shea Whitcomb to be on top. But I really think that this could be an impact guy that could either move through the system really quickly this year and potentially make his major league debut, or by the end of the year going into 2023, I think that this could be a very, very good option for the Houston Astros. And with Carlos Correa right now in the middle of the lockout, up in the air of where he's going to end up, this could be a very good solution for that shortstop position that is now opened up there. I love Shea Whitcomb. We'll talk about some other options later on here in the podcast as well. But personally, I think that this is the guy that needs to be targeted. And really, I'll go as much as, 15 team leagues, 12 team teams, maybe if you have really, really deep rosters. But for the most part, 20 team, 30 team, this is a guy that you need to have in your minor league system.
Yeah, this was a guy, like you said, we fell in love with pretty quickly when we were watching him at the game. Very quick. He standing, being 202 pounds at 6'2", 6'3", you would think his body is maxed out. But Rick, correct me if I'm wrong. He actually looked fairly slim whenever we saw him in person. Like you could see him put on a little bit more muscle, a little bit more size to where that power could develop quite significantly. if he did in fact do that. And that's what you would expect from the natural progression. You don't expect a ton more because of his age, but those 25 doubles and total 48 extra base hits really lead to believe that there's more. There's another level to this guy. Now, this may come at the sacrifice of some power, but I'm right there with you on Shay Whitcomb. I was a bit surprised when I saw you put him at number one, but I could definitely see it after seeing him in person, looking over his numbers. The only thing that would stop me from buying in 110% would be his high strikeout rate. But that's something that can be worked on over time. I'd like to see that come down in the coming levels, but this is a guy who I could definitely see myself buying into, if the cost was right in any league.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I said, I mean, you could be able to relatively acquire him on the cheap. There's been several of these 30-man leagues that I've been able to actually find him on the waiver wire, which is ridiculous, honestly. So, check your waiver wire, see if he's there, work him in as a throw in into some deals. And unless some of your owners end up taking a look, and most of them with Houston Astros prospects usually just kind of glaze over them. That's no disrespect. It just usually happens. You can get a couple of these thrown in, and I think that this is a guy to target. I was very impressed whenever we both saw him, and you're right. He has some room to put on, some good weight. So,
Mm-hmm.
that power output, it could get a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Well, the next guy is Rick. You and I both know that I'm a big. I love pitchers. I love arms. Young, old, doesn't matter. I love looking at them. And this is a guy you actually recently brought into my attention, and that was Hunter Brown, right-handed pitcher, 23 years old, 6'2", 212 pounds. He was drafted in 2019 in the 5th round. Rick, this is a guy that I'm going to take a second here to kind of look at him. He's a guy with tremendous strikeout potential, but that does not come without its warts. He walks a ton. I mean, an absolute ton. He was able to throw just over 100 innings last year, and his walks per 9 were not great. Rick, I'm not going to go on too much here. I'd like for you to kind of take over from there. Hunter Brown's a guy I like, but there's a little bit of scariness to him.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And whenever you're looking at Hunter Brown, in general, he was taken in the 5th round of the 2019 draft. So 166th overall. He was not a highly touted prospect by any means. The fastball is absolutely electric. And I wrote in my update that, he's hitting, 96, 98 miles per hour, and he's been seen to be able to touch triple digits. This is going to be a lot of high heat. It's really what he kind of focuses a lot on. And then has an absolutely devastating curveball slider combination that really induces a lot of swing and miss. The changeup is suspect. And quite frankly, with what you were talking about with the walk rates, this is going to be a guy that if he's going to stick as a starter going forward, the changeup's going to have to get better. He's going to have to, and he's going to have to limit some of the walks, which is hard because you're right. The control has been very, very wonky with him to this point. So whenever you look at what he was able to do in 2021, because this is his second full year, well, I guess his first full year of pro ball, he was able to throw 23 and 2/3 innings in 2019. But his first full year, he started the year in Double A. And then finished the year in AAA. So 2 levels gone through this year. He did start in 19 games. He did pitch a little bit in relief as well to kind of see what they had there. But 100 and a third innings pitched, 131 strikeouts. Strikeouts are definitely there. I did like seeing the fact that he did break 100, even though he got basically right to 100. It was good to be able to see that in his first full season here. He did keep batters to a 245 average against, which I think primarily is in due large part to the large amount of walks that he's able to have, and being into situations in which that he's got to put it over the plate. I think whenever that happens, that's whenever mistakes can happen. He had 12 long balls and 100 innings pitched. But here's the thing. I think that there is a lot of upside here. If he can control where he's pitching the ball, this could be a very electric arm that could go into Houston's rotation, and if not into the bullpen. And this is a team at the major league level that's been able to bring a little bit more out of their prospects. We've seen this with Framber Valdez, Jose Urquidy. They've been able to take a little bit more out of them. Luis Garcia, you know, you can get a little bit more out of him whenever you can move him out of just that mindset of just being a reliever. I think they can get a little bit more, and he reminds it. And Hunter Brown, reminds me a lot of a prospect that we're going to be talking later on in the list. They both have a lot of similar setups to how they're doing things. Worst case scenario. This is an absolute worst case scenario. This could be a prospect that could be a lights out either setup man or closer with the way that he could just pound the ball in there. So I think either way, Hunter Brown is a good target, and mostly because he's not going to cost you too much. If you think about the cost to acquire, I mean, this is a guy over the season that had a 4.04 ERA. Okay. Any owners that have him are really just going to look at the strikeouts. They're not going to look at a whole lot else. But the 4.04 ERA is kind of a deterrent, and I think that that's something that you can end up working into a lot of your deals. Some of the deeper dynasty leagues, I can see him being taken in some 12 teams just because of proximity, and it really just depends on what the Astros are going to end up doing. I am very curious, Matt, to see what you think, because you're absolutely right with the walk rate. That is something that is a concern. What do you see in Hunter Brown?
I think honestly, what I see in Hunter Brown in the absolute worst case scenario with him is actually not that bad. To me, whenever you look at his mix, now you have to kind of polish it, or you have to kind of refine what you're looking at a little bit. But he almost looks like Joe Kelly to me. If you go
I
look
like
at the
that.
usages and where he sits, he looks like current day Joe Kelly. And whenever you go and look at Kelly's profile, Kelly's a former Cardinal. So he was somebody I used to watch a lot. His walks, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, Rick, but tell me if this doesn't look familiar. In 2016, 5 walks per nine. 17, 4.19. 18, 4.39. Now, if you switch back to Mr. Hunter Brown, at his 2 stops this year, let's see, where was it? Walks per nine. Oh, well, we'll go back to 2019. 6.85, 5.29, 3.71. But his K rates sit right where Joe Kelly sits, 10, 9, 11. And so to me, just like you were saying, worst case scenario for him, lights out reliever, setup man, or possibly a closer for the Astros in the future. The thing that concerns me more than anything is not his ability, but it's the ability of the Astros to develop him. There's a guy coming up on the list that they have not been able to get his control reined in. And so that worries me more than anything. But when you put a floor at Joe Kelly, and I looked it up, his fastball tops out at 98 and consistently sits between 93 and 96 late into his start. So he's got the stamina to go. It's just a control thing, which means if he can't get that under control, it's going to become an exposure thing. And how do you keep a pitcher like that from losing it all? Limit his exposure by keeping him to 1 inning a game. So to me, Joe Kelly's his floor, and it's only up from there.
That's a really, really good comp. If there's anything that Matt Bazin does really, really well, it's these comps, man. And I tell you, you're right. And if that's the floor, heck, I'm buying that all day long, because a lot of us do play in a lot of deeper leagues, and relief pitchers are valuable, especially if you can end up getting in, at the ground floor at something like this. I mean, I remember a couple of years back, you and I both talked about this with Andres Munoz. Munoz is now with the Mariners, and he's looking to be, their closer long term. They've already extended him. So, this might be a good opportunity,
Could
especially
you
with a team that's going to
imagine?
have to save some money.
Could you imagine being in a 10-team league and getting in 2 years before Edwin Diaz saved almost 60 games and being the guy who's planted your flag in there? Hunter Brown could be that guy. I'm not saying he's Edwin Diaz, but he could be that guy. And so It's something I look forward to, and I will watch him. If you start to see that turn in his statistics, where he starts stringing together 3 or 4 starts, where he's limiting those walks and getting into the 5 1/3, 5 2/3, and you're seeing 2 3 walks. I say watch that, and if you get an opportunity, nab him up, because people are only going to be looking at his collective stats, not his game by game stats. And so this is somewhere you can easily get, you can pay well below market value for this guy.
Yeah, there's a lot of values in this system that you'll end up finding, and I noticed this as well, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Don't be deterred by the Astros not having him start every single game or every single outing. Okay, you'll find in their system they love to be able to have starters that also go out into the pen and see how they end up upticking. They
Yeah,
like being able to see that.
let's see, Chris Davinsky, Joshua James, who's the one from this past year. Um, but you get my point. They and that just speaks to what you're saying. They don't just do that in the minors; they do it top to bottom, and they want to be Brad Peacock. They've got several guys that they've done that with, and that speaks to what you were saying. Don't let that deter you when you start to see those spots start up. And a lot of the times, a guy will or starting a rotation, and they just want him to get work. So go out there, close out an inning or two, and that's how they like to do things from time to time.
Hunter Brown had a save last year too, so
Yep.
that's what I'm saying. So just don't look too deep into it.
hmm Don't always get caught up in the collective stats for the season, because a lot of times, and Rick, you and I have gotten burned on some trades in some dynasty leagues where you get so held up in those collective stats that you forget that there's ebbs and flows in a season. Our buddy Josh Wolf spoke to that whenever we spoke to him a couple months back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to go ahead and move on a little bit. And this is a name you and I have spoken about to nauseum. It's Forrest Whitley. 6'7" giant, 238 pounds. He's now 24 years old. We've spoken repeatedly about his potential, and it's always been something. Whether it's a suspension, whether it's injury, whether it's inconsistency. Rick, we've spoken ridiculously about this kid. I don't know what else you have left to say. But he's your number 3 ranked prospect in the system, and I'd like to get a little something out of you from him.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean I'm not going to go too deep into it because I think we've all heard a lot about Forrest Whitley. Um, it's unfortunate because we really haven't been able to see too much of what he's been able to do. We've been hearing a lot about back and shoulder issues. Um, you know, he comes back, he looks pretty good, and then all of a sudden he's back on the shelf again. The height, the size of Forrest Whitley is fantastic, in the fact that he can strike out a ton of batters. He can be electric whenever his stuff's on. Now we're seeing this with Mackenzie Gore too, where their control just all of a sudden just disappears. And Forrest Whitley was there before Mackenzie Gore is now, and it's unfortunate. But with Forrest Whitley, we heard this year was going to be kind of the year that he was going to be able to figure it out, get everything together, and go on. And unfortunately, we heard at the beginning of the season that he was going to be going in for Tommy John surgery. So he obviously missed this entire year. Once again, another year in which that we don't know what's coming next. I think that there's a very real possibility that this could be a reliever long term. And if that's the case, he's got absolutely amazing stuff to be able to do so. Um, you know, you got a fastball, curveball, slider, and changeup all graded at plus pitches. It really just kind of sits here like you got the stuff. You just got to be able to control it, and it's not quite to the Riley Pint type of control, but it wasn't too far off. And he's been getting hit his entire minor league career. Whenever you look at his statistics, to this point, I mean, you're looking at an average against of 253, 230, 160, 259. So he gets hit relatively well. But I'm curious to see whenever he comes back from Tommy John, number one, how the Astros are going to handle him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's starting to get to the point now, being drafted in 2016, that he's going to be up against the Rule 5. He's going to end up having to be on the 40 man.
Well,
Um,
I've just checked here. He is in fact already on the 40 man,
Okay.
because he's moved over the Rule 5 line. And Rick, I don't mean to cut you off here, but uh, I don't mean to be the eternal pessimist. I love me some arms. I was big on Forrest Whitley when we first got into deep fantasy. Um, but to be completely frank with you, and I don't ever want to mislead you or the streamers or anything, my hope is gone for this guy. And the reason being is because we've got one other pitcher in the major leagues who matches his height, and that is Tyler Glasnow. The big problem with guys that large is a repeatable delivery. And it's not often seen that guys that big have that level of success. And the fact that he's having control problems, and these control problems have been there for quite some time, um, it's it's not good. And if I were you, and you can get even 35 to 40 cents on the dollar something for him, I would honestly do it. I just don't hold out much hope for ever getting a 1, 2, 3, or 4 starter out of him. I think he's going to follow the Mike Minor role of, one decent season and then float off, one decent season and then float off. It's just not enough here to even hang just a modicum of hope off of.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. Mm, it's a difficult situation. I mean, really, we just kind of got to look and see what happens whenever he comes back. But right now, like, it's hard. You can't really sell him for much, and we don't know what we can expect out of him. So
Yep. Whatever
I'd
your
venture.
level of investment is, you're not going to get that out. So you're either going to have to make that hard decision between holding and seeing
Yeah,
what you got left and selling them for what you can get for them.
and it's hard because a lot of the Forrest Whitley owners to this point have already kind of held pat to this point. So
Prospect
it
fatigue is a
it's a,
real thing.
it is it is. So yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna hop on. Sorry, we kind of got stretched out a little bit there. Yet another 23, 24 year old here, Rick. We got the catching prospect Corey Lee, 6'2", 210 pounds, drafted in the first round of 2019. Rick, this isn't somebody I've dug really deep into because I'm just not. I just don't pay attention to catchers at all. But at a quick glance, and I'll let you get into it next. Uh, this dude knows how to take a walk from what I'm seeing here, man. Give me a little bit on Corey Lee because if I'm not mistaken, they're going to be needing a new backstop here in the coming years.
This is the catcher of the future for the Astros. And quite frankly, he might be one of the most underrated catching prospects in the minor leagues right now. Um, in the sole fact that he once he was taken in 2019, I think that he was actually, let me double check this. I want to make sure. I believe he was the last first round draft pick
He was.
that was taken by the Houston Astros, and that was back in 2019. So they haven't had a first round draft pick since 2019. And they took him out of Cal, in which that he was very, very solid in Cal. And really, whenever he was drafted, it was just kind of like, and everybody moved on. He put up decent numbers whenever he was drafted and brought into the system. But this year, he's been able to ascend 3 different levels from high A, double A, and triple A. And to this point, he has a 277, 340, 438 slash line with 11 home runs, 4 stolen bases. He has 18. He actually has 19. Actually, no. Sorry. He has 30 extra base hits throughout the course of this year. Um, and Matt, you kind of alluded to what is so good about Corey Lee, and that's the fact that he can draw a walk. Obviously, his short amount of time in AAA was so, but this year could be a really good opportunity for him to start the year in AAA and be able to get on over to the major leagues relatively quickly because they're really not rolling out much in terms of the catching position. And this could be a guy that, can be a solid contributor for you in a lot of these deep dynasty leagues and, back ends, of some of your more shallow dynasty leagues. I really like Corey Lee. I think that he's just a very good player, a good catcher, good catching option for a lot of those who just punt. And there's a lot that's here with our moderators and the weekly streamer. We're just not huge into catching. I like a lot more catchers than I think a lot of them do. But I think that this is one of these types of underrated catching prospects that you can fill your minor leagues in and help.
Well, right now they're running out Martin Maldonado at backstop, and at 30, 34 and a half, almost 30, or excuse me, 35 and a half, almost 36 years old, you're not going to get what very much out of him. He's got a vesting option for 2023. And with that being said, that kind of fits the timeline. If that vesting option doesn't come to fruition, Corey Lee could easily see his way into the majors this coming season towards the tail end of the season. And another aspect of this to think about is if they do end up losing Carlos Correa, the drop off to whoever they replace him with, whether it's internal or they bring in an outside player like a Trevor Story, there's going to be a significant drop off there. So they're going to be piecing together whatever offense they can, and on the surface, it looks like Corey Lee is going to be able to put the bat on the ball and actually help that offense score some runs at a much more successful clip than what Maldonado is. So if you are one of those people who forgets catcher quite often, like myself does, this is a guy that you could probably nab towards the tail end of the season who's going to be able to help push redraft and some dynasty leagues over the edge just so you get some sort of production out of that albatross of a position. Maldonado against 36. He's going to be spelled at times. So this is a position that you may want to take an opportunity to look at. If you don't have the Rutschman, Will Smith players of the world, you got to take the production where you can get it. And Corey Lee is a guy who can give you that. He looks like he could have a career kind of like Yachty has, where it's never going to pop, but it's always just going to be, well, he finished the season with 18, 19 home runs, 60, 70, 80 RBIs, runs scored, and you just take what you can get from it.
No, I agree with that, and the defensive skills are good there. And we've seen this countless times where, some of these players are able to get down to Houston and they're just able to pop it right over there to the left field line. And come and do a lot. I mean, Bregman's made a career out of it. So,
No, we're going to go ahead and move on to the youngest player so far on this list, and that's Tyler Whitaker. He's 19 years old. He's an outfielder, big boy at 6'4", 190. He was drafted in the third round in 2021. Dirk, this is a draft class that you haven't exactly spoken overly highly on. So to see a player from that draft class sitting this high on the list, it's either going to speak to how bad the system is or how good the player is. Can you kind of decipher which one that is? Because we don't really have a whole lot of information on Mr. Whitaker here.
Yeah. So there's a couple of these that are in the top 10 that have a little bit on the younger side. Something that's a little bit different for Houston in general. Usually they're trying to go with college bats or arms. Tyler Whitaker is a big boy, 6'4", 190 pounds, like you alluded to. And he is a high school bat. So he's going to take a little bit of time developing, moving through the system. And so far, the results were very, very mixed. In rookie ball, he had a 202 average, 263 OBP, 327 slug. It was at best. But you were able to see some power there in 29 games, 3 home runs, 2 doubles, a triple, and then he stole 8 bases, which was nice to be able to see that he'll be able to move a little bit. I don't think that he's going to be a complete burner on the bases. It's really not what's in his skill set, but it's good to know that he's at least willing to be able to do that. And hopefully be able to come into that power at 6'4". I mean, I'm 6'4" as well. I mean, big boy. I know that you agree, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Mm-hmm. But anyway, no, I think that he can be able to come into some power. He could be a good future asset for them in the outfield. And I think that that's what the Astros were looking for. This was their first pick in this year's draft. So, they're trying to be able to get what they can and develop it to be able to get to the major leagues. I think they got good value here.
Yeah, this is a guy that's going to take quite some time to get to the majors, but it kind of fits with the timeline that they're having to force themselves into and trying to replenish talent. I don't know what to make of Whitaker. His grades are just kind of, but if they can develop him right, he is still young enough to where they can polish those tools, to a level to where he could be an everyday contributor. in the league. So we're going to go ahead and move on to Mr. Joe Perez. And you had mentioned something about Whitaker that kind of really, really gave a perfect example of what it appears Joe Perez is, and it's all over the place. He touched on three different levels this past season, and when you look at his ratios, you look at like his strikeout rate, his walk rate. It was just kind of bouncing all over the place. This is a guy. I mean, 22 years old. We're kind of going back to that little bit older player. um, Rick, what do you see in Joe Perez that could get some kind of hope for Houston fans?
Yeah, so this was actually one of my like sneaky targets whenever I was doing this. Um, the thing that hurt Joe Perez to this point, where you're probably sitting back and just thinking, who is Joe Perez? He ended up having elbow surgery um, shortly after coming into the league after being drafted in 2017, 2017, 2018, 2017. So he basically missed his draft year and then came out in 2018. Did all right, in 4 games, very small sample size. You think about it combined with this year, he has only played 160 games total in his entire minor league career to this point. But this year, he's been able to put together a full season, and they pushed him pretty aggressively, even despite the age. I mean, they pushed him pretty hard, and it seemed like he was able to take to it very well, playing the majority of his games this year in Double A. The numbers even there were solid. I mean, they need some work, but for the most part, he actually did pretty darn well. A 291, 354, 495 slash line with 34 doubles, 18 home runs, and 3 stolen bases. It shows that there is some power to be had here. And I think now that he's actually, healthy to this point, I think that you're being able to see a lot in Joe Perez. And I think that this is something that they can continue to push and be able to utilize as, a super utility type of player for the Astros. These are guys that I'm trying to target on the cheap and be able to go from there.
Well, Joe Perez is again not a guy I would really pay any particular attention to. But if you look at his collective stats, you said he played 160 games throughout his minor league career. He's been able in that 160 games to muscle 25 balls over the fence. So that's something you look forward. It gives you a little bit of hope that he's got something there. One thing that I look at when you look at his profile, this kid has an extremely high BABIP for a guy who is not a good runner at all. I'm kind of curious as to what spikes those numbers in BABIP all throughout. You know, say he played at every level except when he played at low A in 2019. He's had a BABIP well over 340, which is astronomically high. And I'm curious, is that just because he smokes the ball, or is it luck, or what is it? So I'd be interested to get eyes on him. And I don't think we live anywhere near a place that would allow me to do that, Rick. But it's something that kind of it raises my eyebrows in his profile quite a bit. I like the fact that when he was at high, he was able to have a sub 20% strikeout rate. And it's kind of floated back and forth between 27 and below 20. Um, this is an interesting kid to me, but I really don't know what to make of it. I really don't. I don't know if it's just because of, what you were saying about his elbow, or just that they are aggressively pushing him. But you know what this kind of reminds me of in an odd way, but not, I don't think it's this caliber of talent. How when we first got into fantasy, Dylan Carlson was getting that massive push from the Cardinals, and his numbers at the levels that he was playing at looked pedestrian. And it's just kind of like, what is this? And then
Right.
we kind of got that little bit of information that the Cardinals, that's just how they do things. They've done it with Gorman, they've done it with Carlson, they've done it with a lot of their younger guys. So I'm curious as to if his numbers just look slightly skewed because of that.
Yeah. And that very well could be the case.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely feel like this is a guy that we need to be keeping an eye on for 2022 because it could be a big year for him.
Now, out of curiosity, you and I, it's funny because you and I had mentioned something about the Astros in a personal conversation earlier today. It's well known that Perez is not very mobile. He's extremely stiff at third base. Do you Do you think there's a chance, because this is Yuli Gurriel's last year in that he's under contract in Houston? Do you think this is a guy who could be shifted over to first base to get him some playing time in the majors?
I think it's a possibility. It could be this guy in Perez. I mean, it could be Shay Whitcomb. It could end up being, the next guy that we're going to be talking about. I mean,
Okay.
there's a lot of different options that are here in the minor leagues, and there's a lot that we're not going to talk about today as well. You'll see in the Houston Astros system, there's some guys kind of like Jones from a year or so ago, and this is one I think I brought up in my write up last year. He had fantastic numbers at AAA, and Double A, and he just didn't get the run this year at all, and it just kind of fell flat. And we saw De La Cruz go down to Miami and all of a sudden tear it up. He was having fantastic numbers in AAA with the Astros before the trade. Now all of a sudden he's partially untouchable.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, it could be. It could be. I think that they're doing a lot of this multi-position setup throughout their minor leagues so that way they can find somebody to plug and play very easily. And I mean, depending on how Corey Lee is, he might be playing some first base on his days that Maldonado is catching. You never know.
Well, not to. I know we're running a little bit long here. But this next one is going to be a guy that you're going to have to touch on for the streamers. It was somebody that, as soon as you finished the write up, you had mentioned to us that we needed to go and read it with you, me, and the other moderators, and it surprised me that day when I did read it. But it's Mr. Pedro Leon, the shortstop. I know he's been moved to outfield and shortstop, just trying to get him in a position where he's going to get to the majors. But Pedro Leon, 23 years old, not very big at 5'10", 170 pounds. He was J2, we call it J2, but he was signed in January of 2021. Rick, you didn't exactly speak glowingly of Pedro Leon, and I think you owe it to the streamers to know why, because everything you hear out of Houston, Pedro Leon is going to be a stud. I don't see it, but I'd like to know what it is that led you to write a little bit less than stellar uh, write up on Mr. Leon.
Okay. So I want to start off by mentioning what he did very well before I just go off. Pedro Leon can walk ish. 11.5%, 18.7%. That's good. Okay. That's great. He does a very good job in terms of walking. That's fine. Now, the guy has over a 30% strikeout rate in almost every single level that he was in this year. They played him in rookie ball, double A, and triple A. This is a guy who just came over from Cuba, 23 years old. So they presume that they could be able to push him really hard to be able to get up here. They knew Correa was going to be leaving. And I think that this is where it all starts, okay? I think the Astros want Leon to replace Correa if they can't re sign him. I think they want it. And I think they want it really, really bad. And it shows because they pushed him, from rookie ball to double A to triple A. And in every stop, with the exception of double A, he struggled mightily. He struggled mightily. Like I said, the stop in double A was 52 games. He was able to have a 359 OBP. Once again, lends to the walk rate in which that he's doing. But besides that, I mean, the guy is barely hitting. On the season as a whole, 220 average, 339 OBP, 369 slugging. I mean, the guy has 19 extra base hits and 18 stolen bases. The stolen bases came at double A, but I don't think that that's a massive part of his game. I think whenever he gets to the major league level, that it'll more than likely end up going down a little bit. I mean, he
Well,
might be a 10 to 12 stolen base guy, but
I think even that's going to be a bit ambitious. The Astros are known industry wide of not being a team that runs very often. Look at what they've done with Jose Altuve. His game has largely shifted to that. Carlos Correa, Alex Bregman. The only guy who's come through their system and actually stolen bases on a consistent level is Miles Straw. That's because that is his marquee tool. But Rick, I'm gonna kind of bring your attention to one thing, and that's the reason I'm gonna go ahead and shut the stolen base thing down and go right along with you. he is not good at stolen bases. For a guy who has 65 grade speed, you can have elite speed and suck at stolen bases. And I'm sorry, 65 grade speed by MLB Pipeline, and then to turn around and to get caught 10 out of your 25 times or 30 times is, I think it was, say, 28, 28 times. You got caught 10 of them. That's not a part of your game that's very successful. And I'm going to go ahead and say Pedro Leon's not going to be a stealer. He's not a thumper. He can walk, but he's not a very good hitter. So I'm going to have to agree with you here, man. I don't see the infatuation with him unless he's got the most elite defense that I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't think so, man.
It's not. I mean, he has a cannon for an arm, but the defense is so. I mean, really, realistically speaking, I mean, I think, and like I said, I'm not trying to completely bash the guy because he's trying his best to be able to do what he needs to do. But I think honestly, he's a fourth outfielder. I think he's a bench bat, probably at best. I think that a lot of folks in fantasy are trying to hold out hope for it too, and I just don't know if I fully see it or I can buy into it.
Reminds me of
And
Greg Garcia for the Cardinals from a few years ago.
and this is what I'm worried about. I don't even know if he's going to be as good as what Greg Garcia was for the Cards or for the Padres. To be
Yeah.
honest with you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't know. I don't know, and that's why like my write up was pretty harsh, and I apologize for it. But I really think that the Houston Astros have it in their mind that this is the replacement for Correa, and they're going to make it happen no matter what. And I could see a scenario in which that he plays a couple games in AAA next year, and then all of a sudden he's in the major leagues.
Mm-hmm.
And it bothers me, and it shows in my writing, that you can have a prospect like Shay Whitcomb who could easily, you know, factor in here at shortstop and be able to hold his own even in the lower levels of the minors if you push him. I bet he could handle it just as good as Pedro Leon, if not better.
Mm-hmm.
But it
And
just seems like that's what they're trying to push towards. That's what they want.
the unfortunate thing is, and we won't continue to go on too long with this because it does seem like we're just ripping this guy a new one. But to make it as a star player in this league, you have to have a carrying tool. And his carrying tool on paper right now, by the numbers, is simply his walk rate, and that's just not enough to get you there. It's just it may get you there, but it's not going to hold you there. You're going to end up being just that rotational piece that's often forgotten, and rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna go ahead and move on along to Mr. Alex Santos, another arm, right-handed pitcher, 19 years old, another big boy at 6'4", 195, a little bit on the thinner side. He was taken into comp round B in 2020. Rick, give me a little bit on Mr. Alex Santos. We'll try to keep this one a little bit shorter on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Santos right now, 3 pitch mix. He was drafted as a high school arm. And at 6'4", 195, he's got a starter's build. He just needs to fill out a little bit more. The fastball and curveball can flash plus at times, and the changeup's just taking a little bit longer to develop. It was something I said in the write-up here. It's what we expect out of high school arms in general. The changeup usually takes a little bit longer. He played all of this year at Low A Fayetteville, North Carolina, in our backyard, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we'll actually probably be able to see him whenever he gets the bump here to High A in Asheville. So we'll see him a couple times here in Greensboro and Winston. But on the year, 3.46 ERA, 7 games started. Once again, 12 games played. So he did have some relief pitcher, you know, type of appearances, and even has a save here as well. Once again, don't look too deep into that. 41 and 2/3 innings pitched. He has 48 strikeouts, and a 205 average against. Now, the major thing that I know Matthew Baisden, aka Matty Ballgame, is looking at right now, this guy walks a ton. The
Christ.
control is definitely something that needs to be worked on, and if he cannot get that under control, he will be a relief pitcher, which is very unfortunate because he could be something if he could get it under control.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
and
was looking at that
he can
just
keep the
now.
ball in the ballpark too. That's
Mm-hmm.
something I like. But go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, that walk rate is pretty bad. I look at Rick. You and I, we do a lot of looking over various different publications as far as their scouting grades and how they like to look at things. And uh, I've never seen a player with a 25 grade control anywhere. That is alarming. And this is a guy who in some leagues that I'm in is going like he's an actual commodity. And I'm curious as to why that is. I don't like to bank on that much upside, especially from a kid that's 19 and you really don't have much to go off of with him. You know, he's got the standard three pitch mix that you need to be a starter: fastball, slider, curveball. With his curveball actually grading out as one of his best pitches currently. But that command really, really scares me, man. He doesn't give up many home runs in the small sample size that we saw. Um, you know, he's got a little bit less than average ground ball rate, but his strand rate's good, so it allows that ERA to look a little bit better than what it really should for a guy walking almost 6.5, 7 batters per nine. And I'm sorry, I don't care what kind of strikeout rate you have. No, no. So I mean, he's a dude, and he's young, so he can figure it out. But that right there is no. I really can't say much other than that. We're going to go ahead and hop on to Mr. Chase McDermott, 23 years old, left-handed bat, standing 6'3", 195 pounds. Rick, he's got a little bit of run this past year. He pitched about 21 innings. Can you give us a little bit on Mr. McDermott?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the targets I think you guys should take a look at. Very inexpensive. There's a lot of reliever risk here, but they are still trying to work him as a starter. Um, you know, electric fastball, great curveball. The changeup is his third pitch. It is lagging behind. This is a college arm, so you would expect it to be better off. I'm hoping the Astros can be able to work with them a little bit on that. But with a right-handed pitcher like this, he was able to see two different levels in rookie and low A in Fayetteville here, but on the season as a whole, 2.95 ERA, 21 and a third innings pitched, 40 strikeouts. Kept batters to a 162 average against, which is just fantastic. But once again, you got to deal with those walks, right? So 40 walks, or not 40 walks, 11 walks and 21 and a third innings pitched. You know, it's not terrible. It's not Alex Santos, but it's not going in the right direction either. So I want to see a little bit more out of Chase McDermott in terms of that. 4 games started in 7 games played, so some reliever, some starter. It's average for what we're seeing here. Chase McDermott is a guy that I think you guys can target in some of your deeper dynasty leagues and could be very useful as either a high-end relief pitcher or into a starter's role, depending on how that changeup develops.
Being 23 years old and being a college arm, you would expect a lot of the control to be better from a guy like this, and unfortunately, it's not. And he has a lot of trouble locating his secondary pitches. He's got some heat to throw, but when you can't locate those secondary pitches, I think Rick, I make a statement here that you pretty much agree with 100%. Those secondaries are your make or break, and if you can't locate those, I don't care what pitches they are, you're not going to make it very long. And whenever publications are already talking that you're probably going to the bullpen, it doesn't show very glowing reports. And then, you know, the number one thing that's going to concern me about his profile, Rick, is he's a college arm. Why did he only pitch 21 and a third innings this year? You would expected him to get a little bit more run than that, and you would expected whenever you see some guys like Max Mayer, Asa Lacy, some of the guys starting in high A and they're a year younger or right at his age, you would expect him to get a more challenging assignment and to get more run than what he got this past year. So that's something there that kind of rings a bell with me as to where they think he's at in his development, and this just really isn't a guy I would put a whole lot of stock into, paying a bunch for. And I don't, this is a guy inside your top 10, and I don't necessarily think it is kind of poo-pooing your write-up. I think you're just speaking to what little strength is left in the system.
Yeah, pretty much. He has already had Tommy John, so he's good to go there. He came from Ball State, so, I think that they're just being careful with a lot of these guys, and in low A, they won't typically put it on a whole lot of innings on these guys. And the next guy we're going to be talking about, he was down in low A as well.
Mm-hmm. So the next guy we're going to hop to is Mr. Jordan Brewer. Mr. Jordan Brewer is an outfield prospect, yet another older one, especially for somebody who played low A high A this past year. Right-handed bat, 6'1", 195. So he's got a good frame. His number one standout tool right now, Rick, is his speed. Outside of that, he looks like he has decent grades across the board with everything except his hit tool. Rick, can you tell us a little about Mr. Jordan Brewer, please?
Yeah, so absolutely. So originally, whenever they were grading that, if you look at what he was able to do in 2019, you'd be exactly right. The hit tool was rough. Went into the alt site in 2020, did a lot of retool in terms of his swing, his swing path, how he was able to do everything there. And it really shows because he was able to play the entire year at low A in Fayetteville this year. And as you said, he is kind of old for the level ish. Um, it's hard with this new restructure. They have a lot of different guys in a lot of different places. Typically, they'd be higher. But on the year, he slashed 275, 375 OBP, and a 410 slugging. So he really started to put everything together to a point that it looked presentable there in 65 games. So pretty decent sample size there. Whenever you're looking at the fact that he ended up having 20 extra base hits and 21 stolen bases on the season as well, you can see that the speed is there. He is able to draw walks, so that definitely helps. This is a guy that I think could really get a good push here in 2022. Maybe make it up to AAA just because of the age. He'll probably go to high A and then just ascend pretty quickly from there. But all in all, I mean, even at what 24 this time next year, I mean, he could knock on the door for the majors in 2023 relatively easily. And I think this is going to be a slash and dash type of guy. I think this is
Mm-hmm.
really what he's going to kind of look like. I don't think you're going to see a lot of power out of him. Um, but Jordan Brewer's the guy I like. I think he's a good target right now.
Okay. Well, Rick, we here at the Streamer like to do our two risers. So where we pick out two players in the system, and those are the ones that we expect to ascend in the coming year, who could possibly ascend into the top 10 on just the fringes or higher into it. Rick, go ahead and tell me who the two risers you pick for this system are. One name I'm actually very familiar with.
Yeah, so it was somewhat difficult being able to try to do this because there's a lot of guys that I wanted to say for these two risers. But the one that I ended up settling on here so far would be Alex McKenna. Um, in 2021, he was able to ascend from high A to double A to finish out the year. And I mean, put together pretty decent numbers across the board. He is an outfield prospect, 261, 356, 478 slash line. 15 home runs, 8 stolen bases. That's solid. Saw decent output in terms of doubles, triples, which is always, a slight indicator that there's a little bit more power to be able to have here. As a little bit older prospect here at 24, I really wanted to see a little bit more out of him, but I think this is a guy that the Astros really like, could end up continuing to get that good push, maybe something to keep on your mind, going in this year. Obviously, we've seen some of these lower end prospects be able to make the majors with the Astros and contribute a little bit towards their major league club. So, Alex McKinnon is a guy that I really like there. Jeremy Pena is another one that I really do like. I'm just pulling everything up here real quick. He is a guy that whenever I was doing this write up, I really wanted to have him immediately up near the top, right? And in most of these rankings, you see him at the top
Very close
of
to.
this.
Yep.
Right, exactly. Now, he only played 37 games this year. He was dealing with some injuries, you know, 7 games in rookie ball, and then 30 games in AAA. The guy's basically, knocking on the door here for the major leagues. But a 297 average, 363 OBP, 579 slug. That's all really, really good. 10 home runs, 6 stolen bases. He did a lot in a very short amount of time. It's the injury that was kind of bothering me. and I couldn't figure out exactly where to kind of place it. Um, I don't quite know if, whenever he does get the call, where he's going to end up playing. Because, like I said, I really think that the Astros are focusing on Pedro Leon. They might put Pena there for the time being, and then it'll be a battle of those two. Once again, I'm rooting for Shay Whitcomb, but I think this is going to be another good option for them going into 2022.
Well, one of the things you want to look at with Jeremy Pena, and real quick, I'm going to touch on McKenna. McKenna looks almost like a carbon copy of Chas McCormick, and they seem to have several players just like this already in their system. But whenever you look at Jeremy Pena, just real quick to kind of contextualize that AAA stint of 30 games this past year and how dominant he was in such a short amount of time. A 346 OBP with a 287 batting average, phenomenal, especially when you take into account the fact that he only had a 4.5% walk rate. When you see that difference in OBP and walk and average, I'm typically wanting to see an 8 to 9% walk rate. But no, that wasn't the case with him. He was just putting the bat on the ball. But the thing that was the most impressive about that small sample size of 30 games was the fact that he had 16 extra base hits in that short amount of time. That is incredible. You extrapolate that out over an entire season, which I know that's you can do that to a fault. But if you extrapolated that out to 150 games or 600 plate appearances, which is considered well over a full season, I mean, you're talking what? Let's see, you're talking 80 extra base hits over the course of an entire season, which is just absolutely incredible. I don't know what to make of Mr. Jeremy Pena. I don't know where he's going to play, much like you. He's blocked at second base. He's blocked at third base. And as they continue to bring up the Chas McCormicks and the Miles Straws of the world, he's going to be blocked in the outfield. They're not going to use him at DH. He cannot play first base. So I'd be interested to see. And the unfortunate part about what you said, Rick, is they seem so dead set on Pedro Leon being the everyday shortstop that unfortunately their infatuation with him is going to stop a player like Jeremy Pena or even Shay Whitcomb eventually from pushing and making that a better ball club on the major league level. To me, there's not a whole lot that scares me about Jeremy Pena's profile. It's really just that he's going to be blocked. I mean, he's got good size. He's a little bit older, but he's got good size. I mean, he can put the bat on the ball. He does not strike out to what we consider an insane amount, which would be, something north of 30%. He's sitting right at about 26.5%, which is manageable, especially when you're putting the ball. I mean, you're putting the ball over the fence at the clip that he did at AAA. So I'd be interested to see how they handle this, especially if Pedro Leon continues to flounder, which is he's done triumphantly at all three stops this past season.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree.
So, Rick, do you have anything else that you want to let the streamers in on for this system?
For this system, no. Like I said, there's a lot of different guys to be able to target here for some of your deeper dynasty leagues. And I believe that, you'll read this right up, you'll find what we're talking about. You'll be able to see the rankings of how we did it 11 through 30. You'll be able to see, a lot that you could be able to take away from it. I think that this is a system that once they're able to get their draft picks back in line, I think that hopefully the system will be able to be replenished a little bit more. I think they really need it because otherwise it's going to be a very, very rough rebuild whenever it inevitably gets to that point. But anyway, appreciate you, Matt, for being on today. It's always a pleasure to be able to have you on here, and especially whenever we're talking pitching. For those of you who do not know, we will be creating a second podcast with Matty Ballgame and myself. It'll be called The Setup Man. It will be a pitching-based podcast. We'll be able to go over all the SP, setups for the week and break down righty-lefty matchups, all that fun stuff, and be able to break down some of these pitchers to see, if we're all in on them and if you should go and buy them. So, Matty Ballgame is very, very knowledgeable in that respect. And if you haven't read any of his write-ups to this point, you absolutely need to do it. What are you doing? What are you doing? Go read these write-ups. They're absolutely fantastic. Gossman was the last one last week, and it was out of this world. Out of this world. Matt, what are you planning on working on for your next pitching write-up? Do you have an idea or a couple ones?
We've discussed several different things. I know you've asked me to jump into the potential Texas Rangers rotation, and we've had a couple other talks about some hidden gems like Mr. Sandoval. We haven't quite picked a direction on which to go yet because I've taken some time away to hop on the Rays system and the Royals system right up for the coming weeks. So we haven't quite decided yet, but we will be working on something here in the coming days.
Now, I'm going to try to see if we can get a slight sneak peek. Those two systems that you're doing, the Royals and the Rays, there's got to be some pitching in there that you like. I mean, those
Oh
are some
my
pretty
God.
pretty
Yes.
decent pitching,
Y-
factories. I don't want you to get into too much detail, but can you give the listeners a little sneak peek?
yes, Mr. Jacob Lopez is my man crush now in the Rays system. That is my boy. He started out in San Francisco, got moved to Tampa, and I love it. If you like strikeouts, this is your boy.
That's what I'm talking about. These are some hot takes here right now. Now, you guys make sure that you subscribe to the podcast, rate and review. Check out the Weekly Streamer Facebook group. There, you're going to be able to find all of our different conversations that we have going on. We have a private and public page. If you're not following me on Instagram and Twitter, you can follow me at Must Be the Hawk and the Weekly Streamer Network at that handle as well. And from all of us here at the Weekly Streamer, we want to make sure that you have yourselves a great baseball week.